Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to do my review of AEW's Collision. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is a triple threat match for the TNT Championship. It is Darby Allin versus Luchasaurus versus Christian Cage. I thought it was a good match to start Collision. Back and forth matchup between Allin, Luchasaurus, and Christian, with Luchasaurus and Christian keeping the pace of the match. Darby then hits a Scorpion Death Drop. Darby also hits a stunner as well. Luchasaurus then hits a chokeslam on Darby Allin. Darby then hits Luchasaurus with a title. Darby then hits a coffin drop on Luchasaurus, but Christian gets back in the ring, throws Darby out of the ring after Darby landed the coffin drop. Christian then ultimately goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match and new TNT champion is Christian Cage. Hats off to Christian Cage for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we have a Don Callis segment. Don Callis is backstage. Callis talks about Omega and Jericho and what he's done for both Omega and Jericho. Don Callis then he mentions that he has a new member to the Don Callis family, which is Will Ospreay. And it looks like we might get Omega, Ibushi, and Jericho versus Takeshita Guevara and Will Ospreay at Wrestle Dream, which is going to be an absolute crazy matchup this weekend. Moving on from that, it was announced as well as that Darby Allin will face Christian Cage for the TNT Championship at Wrestle Dream in a 2 out of 3 falls matchup for the TNT Championship. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is RVD teaming up with Hook versus Angelo Parker and Matt Menard. This was actually RVD's Collision debut. The match itself, I thought was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between both teams with Parker and Menard keeping the pace of the match. But RVD ultimately hits a 5-star frog splash, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are RVD and Hook. Hats off to RVD and Hook for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, it was also announced for Wrestle Dream that it is going to be for the Ring of Honor World Championship as well as the New Japan Openweight Championship is Eddie Kingston versus Shibata at Wrestle Dream. Again, another classic matchup between Kingston and Shibata, and I'm definitely looking forward to that matchup at Wrestle Dream. Moving on from that, though, we go into our next match of the night. It is Julia Hart versus Kiera Hogan. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Julia Hart and Hogan, with Hart keeping the pace of the match. Hart then hits a standing moonsault in the middle of the ring on Hogan, and then Hart ultimately applies a submission hold on Kiera Hogan. Hogan taps out, and your winner of the match is Julia Hart. After the match, Julia Hart attacks Hogan. Sky Blue comes down to the ring, but Julia Hart sprays mist into Sky Blue's face. And then Julia Hart calls out Chris Statlander for the TBS Championship at Wrestle Dream. Moving on from that, it was also announced as well for Wrestle Dream that it's going to be MJF and Adam Cole defending the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships against the Righteous at Wrestle Dream. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Andrade El Idolo versus Jay White. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Andrade and Jay White, with Jay White keeping the pace of the match. Andrade and Jay White then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Andrade hitting a spinning back fist on Jay White for a near fall. Andrade then hits a hammerlock DDT on Jay White for a near fall. Andrade then applies a figure 8. Referee gets distracted. Juice Robinson then attacks Andrade, which allows Jay White to hit the Blade Runner on Andrade, pins him for the 3. And your winner of the match is Jay White. Hats off to Jay White for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the AEW Tag Team Championships. It is FTR versus the Workhorsemen. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between FTR and the Workhorsemen, with the Workhorsemen keeping the pace of the match. JD Drake hits a moonsault off the top rope. It looked absolutely brutal, but Dax Harwood ultimately applies a sharpshooter. And your winners of the match by submission, and still AEW Tag Team Champions, are FTR. Hats off to FTR for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we have a Lana segment. Lana talks about helping Miro and why she's in AEW. Lana says Miro has lost his way. But then Lana also mentions that she might be possibly managing AEW talent in the future. So, again, look forward to who she's going to manage. How is this all going to get involved with Miro? And I'm hoping that this will also create another storyline for Miro after the storyline that he had with Powerhouse Hobbs that all took place at All Out. So definitely look forward to what's going to happen next with Miro and especially Lana. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of AEW's Collision. It is Bryan Danielson versus Ricky Starks in a Texas death match. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Danielson and Starks, with Starks and Danielson both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Danielson was keeping the pace of the match. Danielson then lands multiple yes kicks on Ricky Starks, but Starks gets up, hits a spear on Danielson. Ricky then goes for a spear, but Danielson counters it with a bell lock. Danielson then chokes Ricky with a chain. Danielson then hits a running knee. Danielson then wraps his knee with the chain, then hits Ricky with another running knee using the chain. And your winner of the match is Bryan Danielson. Hats off to Bryan Danielson for getting the win in this matchup. A couple of things I want to say about Collision, man, before I get out of here. I know I made comments last week about Collision, and I really want to touch base on what I said last week about Collision, and kind of let you all know how I feel about Collision. Number one, man, I think Collision, I'm not trying to be negative. I really don't want to be negative, but I feel like Collision kind of lost their way a little bit after this whole CM Punk thing, and I feel like they're trying to put the pieces back together. I do still believe that Collision has a very hard time building storylines on this show. I truly believe that. I think, with Andrade and Miro, I mean, hell, man, even Keith Lee. Keith Lee needs to be in a storyline. I know right now there's been some, stuff going on with him and Shane Taylor, and I'm not against it. I believe Keith Lee has a match next week on Collision between Keith Lee and Lee Moriarty. Kind of set up that feud between Keith Lee and Shane Taylor, which, I mean, I'm not against it, but, guys like Keith Lee and Andrade and Miro, they need to have predominant storylines. It's the same thing with Thunder Rosa, man. I know Thunder Rosa, from what I understand, has been medically cleared to come back to compete in AEW, but we haven't seen her yet. So hopefully we will see Thunder Rosa soon, and she'll be able to get back in the squared circle. But as far as Collision, man, Collision, I'm not going to sit here and say it was lackluster, but I feel like it's lost its itch, if you will, for what it was when CM Punk was there and everything else. And I'm not trying to say CM Punk was the main reason why, Collision was great, but it also was one of the reasons why a lot of eyeballs were on the product for Collision because of CM Punk. I'm not going to rule that out. CM Punk brought a lot of eyeballs to Collision. Absolutely. Day in and, every single weekend when he was there. But a couple things I'll take away from this show. Don Callis. Don Callis kind of dropped the bombshell with Will Ospreay, but in the same time, we kind of knew that Ospreay was working with Don Callis. The bombshell for me was the six-man tag team matchup. It's going to be Omega, Ibushi, and Jericho teaming up versus Takeshita, Guevara, and Will Ospreay at Wrestle Dream. I think it's going to be a fantastic match, man. I really do. I think it's going to be one of those top matches of the night at Wrestle Dream. I think Wrestle Dream is stacking up to be a really good pay-per-view. And for me, from what I understand, Wrestle Dream really came into existence because Tony Khan wanted to pay tribute to the late, great Antonio Inoki. And that's kind of the basis of this pay-per-view. And it's going to be, a pay-per-view that AEW is going to have for the foreseeable future. So I'm all for it, man. I mean, obviously, I know Tony Khan wants to work with New Japan and having some New Japan talent come over to wrestle in the show, like Will Ospreay. You have Zack Sabre Jr. versus Bryan Danielson, more than likely in the main event for Wrestle Dream. I think it's absolutely awesome. The other thing I want to touch bases on, too, as far as with AEW is concerned, is the pay-per-view format that I think they're going to be going to, and HBO Max. And I touched base on this last week, man. I think 2024, and I mentioned this, a month or two ago, man. I knew that this summer was going to be insane for AEW. Just with everything that's happened, everything that's, came down the pike, whether it was CM Punk and the Jungle Boy situation, obviously All In was a big, big milestone for AEW and professional wrestling as a whole. But I think 2024, man, is going to be a crazy year, not just for AEW, but for professional wrestling. Obviously there's things going on in WWE right now with, WWE having their deal with Endeavor. I mean, obviously, as you guys can tell, I don't know if you guys, looked into the news or not for WWE, but they just let go and released a lot of talent on their roster, including the names of, Shelton Benjamin. Matt Riddle was also released. Dana Brooke was released as well. Mustafa Ali was also released. So WWE let go of some really good, decent talent not too long ago. So, I mean, and again, I don't know if WWE is going to continue to release talent. Who knows? I mean, obviously, with them merging with Endeavor and UFC and stuff like that, obviously there might be more layoffs and stuff like that, it's a damn shame, man. It's horrible. Nobody wants to lose their job, and, it's just a shame. It really is. I mean, it's just horrible. But, as far as AEW is concerned, yeah, I think AEW going into 2024, man, are going to be absolutely insane. I do think it is very possible that we'll see AEW working with HBO Max. I'd be very surprised if they don't. I also think that by next year, AEW will go to a full 12-year pay-per-view format. I mean, right now they have, 6 or 7 pay-per-views already together with WrestleDream. I will be very surprised if we don't have 12 pay-per-views next year for AEW. And honestly, if that's the case, I think what better way to do that than put that on HBO Max? I mean, they also have the Ring of Honor catalog as well. So, I mean, it'd be fantastic for HBO Max. It gets more eyeballs onto HBO Max. More people to subscribe for HBO Max due to AEW and vice versa. I mean, it's a win-win for both, obviously Warner Brother Discovery as well as Tony Khan and AEW. It's a win-win. And right now, I mean, what with WWE and what they've been doing with Peacock, the network and stuff like that. I mean, it's been immensely beneficial for WWE and the pay-per-view format that, they've had, their premium live events and stuff like that. It's perfect, man. And you're paying $9 a month, $10 a month for all these premium live events that you were getting on the, the network or Peacock. I mean, it's absolutely perfect. So I think, business-wise, yeah, it makes absolute sense for AEW and Tony Khan to be working with a streaming service. Now, could be HBO Max or who knows, but I think by 2024, I'd be very surprised if Tony Khan and AEW are not working exclusively with a streaming service to produce pay-per-views and premium live events to the fans. I'd be very surprised. And I'll also be very surprised if we don't have a 12 pay-per-views next year. A 12-month pay-per-view schedule for AEW. I'll be very surprised if we don't. I mean, WrestleDream was announced. I think Tony Khan also mentioned after Grand Slam went off the air, I believe, that he also wants to try to plan another pay-per-view after Full Gear in November. And he's kind of shooting, for what I understand, the date that I was told was December 29th of this year. So it could be very possibility that we might get another announcement of another pay-per-view right after Full Gear. So, I mean, I think Tony Khan, man, he's shooting from the hip right now, man. I think he's just, trying to get AEW into what it once was in the beginning. I mean, because AEW was red hot when it was, created and all the talent they had and the storylines and the matches. And I think Tony Khan's trying to get back to that. And to be honest with you, I would not be surprised too. I mean, is he making room for, the likes of Edge or a Mercedes Moné? I mean, it's very possible. I think Edge's contract with WWE is up at the end of this month of September. So it could be very well possible that if Edge didn't sign with WWE or they didn't sign him, that he could possibly show up at WrestleDream as a surprise. It's the same thing with Mercedes Moné. I think a lot of people were actually surprised that they didn't get a surprise from Edge or Mercedes Moné. I mean, I don't think Edge would be the likely scenario. But a lot of people were, tipping their hat to possibly seeing Mercedes Moné show up at Grand Slam, because everybody had saw her in attendance for the All In show in London and Wembley. So again, man, it's really up in the air. I think, I would not be surprised if Tony Khan's not going to pull something out of the hat, if you will, by the end of the year. I would not be surprised because, going in strong 2024, obviously they still have to work on the TV deal and stuff like that. I think Tony Khan's going to pull all the punches that he possibly can to, pretty much solidify AEW, because, I mean, a lot of people look at them as, the second best company in the world, and they may be. But I know, with losing CM Punk, did it, hurt the company? Yeah, a little bit. There's probably a lot of fans that were just solely there for CM Punk that, they only watched the show or tuned into the show because of CM Punk. And now that CM Punk is no longer with the company, a lot of those CM Punk elitists probably most likely left and do not watch AEW anymore. Do I think, Punk leaving was for the best? Yeah, I do. I think he's a great wrestler. He's a great competitor, but I think his ego just got way, it was above his pay rate, man. To be honest with you, I told you guys from the get-go when they, announced CM Punk coming back, is the juice worth the squeeze, man? Is it worth bringing this guy back to cause, more turmoil and more issues and more drama within the company in that locker room and cause, all out, chaos? And this was stemming from the situation that happened originally between the Young Bucks and CM Punk and Adam Page and Kenny Omega. And that progressively got worse to a point where CM Punk lunged at Tony Khan after, his match with Samoa Joe at All In. Or even before that. So, I mean, there was a whole other situation that was present that day at All In, and it's your biggest show of the year. And you're going to act like that. I think CM Punk, man, I think CM Punk needs to really, really look in the mirror, to be honest with you, man, because he had everything in front of him. He had his own show, everything else like that, and just ruined it, man. His ego just took over, man, and literally just self-sabotaged himself, to be honest with you. But besides CM Punk, that was then, this is now. Collision, like I told you guys before, man, Collision at times does feel like a rampage. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, man. Sometimes Collision does feel like a glorified rampage. And at the same time, too, and I will reiterate this multiple times, man, there needs to be build and storylines. I love what Bryan Danielson and Ricky Starks are doing. I think what Danielson is doing for Ricky Starks is absolutely phenomenal. Because these matches that Starks is having with Danielson is just putting Ricky Starks immensely over right now. And hats off to Danielson for, looking at a guy like Ricky Starks to possibly be a headliner for this company, because Ricky Starks could. Ricky Starks is talented, man. I remember seeing Ricky Starks when he was in NWA going after the NWA Television Championship and had that match with Trevor Murdoch. Ricky Starks has talent, man. He's really good on the microphone. He's talented. He's a great athlete. He's a really good wrestler, and he's still young in the wrestling game, man. He has a lot of time left as a professional wrestler. A lot. He hasn't even reached his prime yet. So, I mean, Ricky Starks is definitely a future world champion, in my honest opinion. And I think, Bryan Danielson sees the same thing in Ricky Starks, and Danielson is putting Ricky Starks over immensely these past few weeks with these matches. The match he had Saturday with the Texas Death Match and matches before that, man, Danielson's definitely putting Ricky Starks over. And the reason why I bring up the whole storyline issue is because there's been talent that had been on AEW's Collision since its existence, and there's really no strong storyline being built. What the hell is House of Black doing? I don't know if Malachi's injured or Buddy Matthews is injured, but what's going on with that situation? Where the hell was Wardlow? Why can't we put Wardlow on Collision? What's going on with that? You had Miro in a storyline with Powerhouse Hobbs. It all came to an end at All Out, and that was it. Then you bring in Lana, and it was, a week or two after we bring Lana in at All Out that we finally get a word from Lana? I mean, come on, man. What are we doing here with these storylines? And that's the issue, my main issue that I have with Collision. Andrade, for example. Andrade is a part of a stable known as Los Ingobernables, okay? With Rush, Preston Vance, and Dralistico. Why can't we have something, even at Wrestle Dream, where you have Andrade teaming up with Rush, Dralistico, and Preston Vance, and we get Jay White, Juice Robinson, and the Gun Club teaming up in an 8-man tag team matchup at Wrestle Dream. It sells itself. Who wouldn't want to see that matchup? I mean, that match will be insane. Absolutely insane. That's a storyline right there. And hopefully it does happen. Hopefully. I'm praying for it. There's other storylines that happened too that weren't finished either. Keith Lee and Swerve. I have reiterated this multiple times, man. Keith Lee and Swerve storyline, there's no ending. Nothing. That storyline is still yet to be finished. To be honest with you, I'm not complaining that Swerve is having a match with Adam Page. I think it's great for Swerve. I think Swerve is severely underrated in AEW. I think Swerve should be TNT champion right now. Or world champion for that matter. There's no reason why Swerve doesn't have a championship title around his waist. There's no reason for it. He's a great heel. I mean, even the stuff that he was doing with AR Fox against Nick Wayne and Darby Allin. The promos, the attack that he had on Nick Wayne in the gym. It was great, man. I mean, what Nick Wayne and Darby were doing with Swerve and AR Fox at that time was phenomenal. I mean, Swerve is, again, severely underrated. And I'm glad that he's on the card for Wrestle Dream, man, because he needs a match. I'm not too big on the Mogul Embassy. I think he's kind of carrying that stable, to be honest with you. But Swerve's underrated. Swerve is immensely underrated. And hopefully he gets, his time and he gets what he deserves, man. He deserves a title opportunity. He deserves a championship belt, man. Big fan of Swerve. And Swerve is underrated. Immensely underrated. But all in all, man, Collision, it just, it does have similarities to, Rampage. Immensely. A lot of similarities between Rampage and Collision. As of late, man, I don't know what's going on with Collision, but it just feels like a glorified Rampage. There needs to be more storylines being built on Collision, and those storylines need to lead into pay-per-view matches. That's all I'm saying, man. Other than that, Collision is not a horrible show. In the beginning, Collision was probably better than Dynamite at the time. In the beginning, in my honest opinion, I think Collision was awesome. And I'm not sitting here saying Collision's entirely bad. They just need to build on storylines that lead to pay-per-view matches. It's not about quantity, man. It's about quality. People want to see quality matches. Not quantity. Quality. Matches that you'll look back on 10, 15 years from now and be like, damn, that was an awesome match, man. And we haven't got that in a long time, just as wrestling fans alone. There's matches that I watched, when I was a kid, man, I will never forget. Mankind versus Taker. Hell in the Cell. When Taker threw Mankind off that cell and he landed on the announce table. Legendary moment. Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon. For the Intercontinental Championship, I believe it was at WrestleMania 10. Phenomenal matchup. Who was the one true Intercontinental Champion? And both those guys were going to decide that night who was the true Intercontinental Championship at that time. In a ladder match. Phenomenal. Bret Hart versus Owen Hart. Bret versus Yokozuna. When Yokozuna was, the most dominant force in professional wrestling at that time. And Bret Hart steals the show. Just moments like that, we don't really get that anymore. I'm not saying those matches are not on the table. They definitely are. I mean, one of the matches that we're, most likely never ever going to get was Kenny Omega and the Bucks versus CM Punk and FTR. That was a match, man. That was a match you can look back on 10, 15 years from now and be like, that was a match, man. That was an awesome match. And we're never going to get it. We're never going to get it. And there was still a lot of matches for CM Punk on the table, man. Punk versus Bryan Danielson. Punk versus Omega. There was a lot of matches still on the table for CM Punk. And like I said, man, he just ruined it, man. He self-sabotaged himself, and that was it. It's in all honesty, for the fans, it's a damn shame. It truly is, man. Those were money-making matches right there, man, and we're never going to get those opportunities to see those matches ever again. We can think about it. We can all sit here and wonder what if, but it's just never going to happen, man. And it's honestly a shame. For the fans, it's a shame. Because we're never going to get that match. We're never going to get the opportunity to see what, those talents can do in the ring. It's not going to happen. But all in all, it was a solid Collision. But this is my review of AEW's Collision. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful. And remember, stay classic. Peace.